Growing up, my sister Sansa loved stories with princesses and knights, but I always wanted to be scared. When my turn came, I would ask old Nan to tell us of magic and monsters. Long ago, when the world was new, the children of the forest sang the song of the earth, and the earth listened. Magic was strong in those days, and the children could commune with all the beasts of the forest, streams and air. The greatest of them could even leave their bodies to hunt, swim and fly in the skins of animals. They were the first wargs. Then, the first men came with fire and sword. They burned the weirwoods and cut down the children. Calling on dark magic, the children raised the sea and shattered the land bridge that the first men had crossed into dawn. When that failed, the children brought down the hammer of waters upon the neck, flooding and transforming it into the bog it is today. After peace came, the two races shared the land and the children's gods for thousands of years. Now comes the good part. Nobody knows how or why, but the magic of the children began to emerge in men. Maybe one child in 1,000 would be born a warg. Fewer still would be born with the sight. Old Nan would not speak of it, and Maester Lewin never believed in it. But with it, the children could know of events far away and even those still to come. Some say the sight was the children's most powerful and terrible secret, and helped turn the tide during the long night. Magic has since fled our world. Among the small folk, any child suspected of being a warg will be left out to die. Beyond the wall, though, a careless hunter might still find his prey has claws and teeth, and a man's mind to guide them, for the wildlings have a different idea of monsters. But even wildlings keep their distance from a warg, because, and here old Nan would lean in close and whisper, how can you tell if the man is wearing the beast, or the beast is wearing the man? Now, old Nan has no more tales, and Maester Lewin will never scoff again. That's fine. I don't like scary stories anymore, because I'm in one.
As a boy, looking out from my father's castle, I thought the sun could never set on the north, so vast did it seem. Part of me still does. The north is by far the largest of the 7 kingdoms, and can fit the other 6 inside it. Not that the others care. Cold and damp, that's how the southerners see the north. But without the cold, a man can't appreciate the fire in his hearth. Without the rain, a man can't appreciate the roof over his head. Let the south have its sun, flowers and affectations. We northerners have home. Mine was once Winterfell, the ancient seat of my father's family, House Stark, who have ruled the north since the first men and were once the kings of winter. Growing up, Lady Catelyn made sure I knew I wasn't a Stark, no matter how much blood I shared with her true-born children. But where their name rules over the north, mine is the north. Snow. Our land stretches from the wall down to the neck, a narrow land that divides us from the rest of Westeros. Legend has it that the children of the forest flooded it in their war against the first men. If that's true, every Northman owes them a debt of gratitude. The swamps of the neck are as good as the wall for keeping out unwelcome armies. And if the swamps don't deter you, the Crannog men should. Small, shy people who rarely leave those swamps, and who follow House Reed, the gatekeepers of the north, and among the most important and loyal bannermen of House Stark. Also a bit strange. I heard their oath of fealty once as a child. It's like no other lords, ancient and dark. They swear by earth and water, by bronze and iron, and by ice and fire. Where House Reed holds the gate to the north, House Manderley holds the port, White Harbour, The closest thing to a southern city we have, governed by the closest thing to a southern family we have. Generations ago, the Manderleys were driven from the Reach, but the Starks gave them their land in return for fealty. Now White Harbour is the richest city of the north, and the Manderleys the richest family. Not in gold and silver like their southern counterparts, but in fish, grain, and trade. As for the other great northern houses, the Starks brought them into the fold during the Age of Heroes. A Stark wrestled an Ironborn for Bear Island and gave it to the Mormons. A Stark granted a keep and land to a younger son, Carlon, in return for putting down a rebellion. His family then grew up into the Karstarks. Starks fought the Wildlings and their kings beyond the wall beside the Umbers of Last Earth, thus earning their fealty. Boltons. Back then they were the bane of the North. A few were even rumoured to wear their enemies' flayed skins as cloaks. But after centuries of war, they too bent the knee. And so House Stark became the kings in the North, but never forgot that they weren't the North. When Aegon and his dragons landed on Westeros, the kings of the Rock and the Reach sent all their men to die to defend their crowns. Torrhen Stark knelt, to spare his people the same fate. He placed duty above pride, just as my brothers in the Night's Watch had done for thousands of years at the Wall. Many think of it as the end of the world, but it's not. I've seen how the land stretches much farther than any man knows, into the land of always winter where the White Walkers came from during the long night. After the first men and the children of the forest beat them back, Brandon the Builder raised the wall and set up the Night's Watch to guard the realms of men. He gave us our oath, our castles and the gift, the lands behind the wall whose farmers and crops sustain us. Southerners may now mock my black brothers as thieves, rapers and worse, and not without cause. But the North remembers why we are there, and if we fall, the South will get a very harsh and very cold reminder.
Men have fought over the Riverlands since the Dawn Age, though that's to be expected of things that rest below the neck. Doesn't help that the Riverlands are between everything and everything else. The Westerland's gold, the Reach's grain, the Vale's rock, and the North's snow? House Mud once ruled as the kings of the rivers and hills, but after 1,000 years their line was exhausted and fell to the Storm Kings, who fell to the Ironborn. I suppose after years of drowning at sea, our rivers look pretty attractive to that race of pirates and rapers. Never mind that their monstrous castle, Harrenhal, was too large to staff and garrison. It turned out the Ironborn wouldn't be there long enough to bother. Aegon Targaryen landed to our south, and, as had many before him, liked the look of the Riverlands. My ancestor Edmund Tully led the desertion of Riverlords to his cause, and was rewarded by getting to watch King Harren burn in his own tower. Unfortunately, that's not all Edmund got. House Tully was named the Lords Paramount of the Trident, which means we had to keep in line all those lords who hadn't governed themselves for thousands of years. We were now responsible for aiding the Mallisters at Seaguard against the pouting Ironborn whenever they got cheeky. For settling Harrenhal on families stupid enough to think its curse would skip them after devouring all previous families. For keeping the Blackwoods and Brackens from wiping each other out and giving us 2 more castles to deal with. For keeping the Freys in their place and out of others' pockets. For marrying off our sons and daughters wisely enough so we didn't follow House Mud into, well, the mud. Yet under the Targaryens, the Riverlands knew a peace we hadn't had for centuries, if ever. But like all good things, sooner or later it all goes to shit. And our shit had a name. Aerys Targaryen. Westeros has had its share of mad kings, but usually they had the sense not to bully more than one powerful house at a time. Ares soon blundered into a triple alliance. The North, Stormlands and Vale rose against him. But of course, where do you think most of the blood was spilled? My brother Hoster guaranteed the answer to that with the marriage of my niece to Eddard Stark, the Warden of the North. At least Hoster didn't send her to Robert. So, the Riverlands joined the war against the Mad King, and it was on one of our rivers that Prince Rhaegar died, sealing the fate of his dynasty. Robert was a great soldier and a horrible king. Drinking and whoring are their own brand of madness when you sit on a throne that everybody wants. He died, and another war started. Again the armies marched. Again the Riverlands burned. If Westeros isn't careful, pretty soon our people will grow some sense and abandon this place for a safer realm, like the Dothraki Sea. I joke, of course. The Riverlands are our home, and God's help us, we love it. Still, as they say, the king eats and the hand takes the shit. The same is true of the Riverlands. The Seven Kingdoms piss, and the Riverlands change clothes. Other houses chose dragons, krakens and lions for their sigils. We Tullys took the trout, that most terrifying of fish, especially when it leaps out of the water. I suppose you don't have many options when you live in the Riverlands. Could have been worse. We could have been minnows or wheat. After all, we make a lot of it. Though a land doesn't get as fertile as ours just by water. The old River Kings, Storm Kings, and the Kings of the Rock spilled blood here for thousands of years, squabbling like children over a new toy, until the Ironborn came and spanked them with their axes. Under Harren the Black, their kingdom stretched all the way to the God's Eye, where they built the largest castle Westeros had ever seen. Maesters teach that Harren was a fool, but he had some sense. If you're going to enslave and torture an entire people, you best have thick walls to hide behind. But the very day the last stone was laid in Harrenhal, Aegon Targaryen landed in Westeros. As soon as he saw Aegon's host on the horizon, my ancestor Edmund led the mass desertion of Riverlords to Aegon's side. I doubt Harren even noticed. The problem with huge castles is they blind you to what's outside, both by their size and the arrogance they inspire. Not that the Ironborn ever lacked for that. They take pride in their ignorance of every trapping of civilization, though any baker could have told them that fire turns stone walls into an oven. And so Harren the Black finally lived up to his name, and the Riverlord swept the Ironborn back to the sea. In return for Edmund's service, House Tully was made Aegon's new Lord Paramount of the Trident, and all the other lords had to swear us fealty. But old habits die hard. The Riverlands are and always have been the middle child of Westeros, caught up in every fart from one lord at another. My ancestors knew that for the Tullys to survive, alliances must be made. Our trout has swum up so many rivers over the centuries and leapt onto so many plates that it's a wonder half the realm's sigils don't have fins by now. Thus, every Tully child is taught family, duty, honor, the Tully words, and pains in the Tully arse. When I returned from the War of the Ninepenny Kings, people called me Sir Brendan. But my older brother Hoster called me Engaged. A great match with a very rich house, to be sure, but I just fought and killed a great deal of men and had no desire to be told when and whom to marry. I broke ties with him, earning the name Blackfish along with my personal sigil, a much more intimidating black trout. I was too stubborn at the time to realize that while other houses fight with swords, House Tully fights with marriages. Then my niece Catelyn's betrothal to Brandon Stark drew us into the war against the Mad King, while my other niece Lysa's betrothal to Jon Arryn cemented the rebellion. If I'd have obeyed my older brother earlier, we'd have had the largest navy in Westeros with us then as well, and our victory would have been swift. Of course, I never mentioned this fact to my brother. He'd have taken it as an apology. My brother is dead now, and my nephew Edmure rules in Riverrun. God's help us. A trout that can't tell the worm from the hook. But he is a Tully, and he is unmarried, and there is a war. We all know how this story ends. Maybe she'll be beautiful. Maybe she'll be rich. As long as she brings swords and men to House Tully, she could look like the fish we hang all over Riverrun. He'll honor his duty to family and swallow it. One blackfish per family can be overlooked. Two, and we'd have to change all those pretty banners.
The Reach is aptly named. We're the ones who give your hands something to do at the table. As the most fertile region of the Seven Kingdoms, we grow the lion's share of the grains and fruit that feed this country. Especially now, since the rebels have burned down the other fields. Thankfully, House Tyrell is here to do its duty to the crown and keep the capital from starvation. Yet, as with all gardens, weeds grow in the Reach too, though few name them as such. Singers fill our heads with chivalry and courtly love, fluff to make boys fight and girls swoon. Oh, the songs are good enough for a pleasure barge down the Mander. They give pleasure to the common people and harmony to the realm. But if the rise of House Tyrell proves anything, it's that virtue and honor have their place. And if you're not careful, that place is the grave. Unlike the Lannisters, Starks, and Arryns, we were never kings in our own right. House Gardner ruled the Reach since the Dawn Age, and we were their stewards. While they warred to enrich their already rich domain, we managed their castle of Highgarden. But then Aegon Targaryen landed with his dragons. Nobody knows why the Gardener King took the field against him. Anyone could see that a man who grows flowers should beware a man who grows fire-breathing monsters. But maybe it wasn't wholly his idea. Maybe someone whispered in his ear about all the face he'd lose with the other 6 kings if he stayed home. The rest is history. The last Gardener King lost his face, along with his body, and his steward Harlan Tyrell promptly yielded Highgarden to Aegon. My grandmother swears that Harlan was like most of our men and grew up banging steel together too loudly for a thought to penetrate. But luckily, his wife had better sense. Whatever the case, in return for Harlan's show of sense, Aegon proclaimed House Tyrell the Lords of the Reach and Wardens of the South, passing over all the other houses with better claims. House Hightower, who were kings before the Andals came, their seat is the oldest city in Westeros. They call it Old Town. Wealthy, proud, and solitary, there have been Hightowers who wouldn't come down from their great lighthouse for decades. Its name, fittingly, is the Hightower. House Florent, who had actual blood ties to the Gardeners. They whinge about their ancient rights to Highgarden every once in a while, and now that their daughter is married to Stannis Baratheon, about their rights to all of Westeros too. Apparently, putting a fox on your banners doesn't impart a fox's wiles. House Tarly, who still gives the Reach the best soldiers it has. If Aegon had named them as his lords, the Reach would have become the greatest military camp in the world, until it starved to death. The price for conscripting all the farmers. Yet Aegon chose us. Centuries later, when his descendant Aerys faced rebellion, the Reach stayed loyal. Mostly. My father, Mace, dealt Robert his only defeat in the war, even if it was my father's vanguard who did most of the fighting before he arrived. After the Battle of Ashford, we laid siege to Storm's End, Robert's home. Unfortunately, the war ended before we could take it and free up our armies to Go save the king. The new King Robert had a forgiving nature. Our crimes were brushed aside without even one execution for the sake of formality. Our family was surprised until Robert's new hand, John Arryn, came by with the bill. The Reach is second only to the Westerlands in wealth, and Robert meant to spend as much of it as he could get his hands on. We gave him the coins he wanted, and later, when he wanted our grain or fruit or wine, he gave them back at whatever price we set. Now, much of Westeros is ashes. The rest of it is armies. As the Starks are fond of saying, winter is coming, and for leagues outside the capital there isn't a harvest to be seen. Have no fear. The Reach is, as always, bountiful. House Tyrell will manage the harvest and keep the Seven Kingdoms from starvation like the good stewards we once were. Just ask House Gardner.
Impregnable. That's how the Vale sees itself. Shielded from Westeros by its mountains. They call the entrance to their land the Bloody Gate because, during the Age of Heroes, a dozen armies supposedly smashed themselves against it. Even if they'd gotten through, the roads of the Vale are narrow, steep, and treacherous. Half their men would have slipped to their deaths, or frozen in the mountain snow. Or so the common wisdom goes. Except the Vale has been conquered. Those vaunted mountains didn't stop the Andals who came by the Eastern Sea. The people of the Vale say that Sir Artus Arryn, the Andal general, flew on the back of a giant falcon and slew the Griffin King on top of the tallest mountain. During Aegon's conquest, one of his sisters did the same, flying her dragon over the Bloody Gate and up to the Eyrie, the Arryn stronghold. And the Arryn boy king yielded the Vale in return for a ride on the beast. Do you sense the theme here? The rationalizing of defeats with mythical beasts and the whims of children, instead of acknowledging the root cause, the arrogance of isolation. The men of the Vale are so proud of their mountains, they can't abide any flaw in them. As with the mountains, so too with their blood. The first Andals landed in the Vale, as its most powerful lords, the Arryns, the Waynwoods, the Corbrays, like to brag. Through their veins runs the blood of the oldest Andal nobility in Westeros, but through their brains runs an even older folly. That blood matters. If it did, those pure-born lords should have been able to exterminate the hill tribes centuries ago. But those primitive raiders, whose tribes more resemble kennels than families, continue to plague the Vale, even kidnapping an Arryn once. Until Tyrion Lannister, an outsider, no Vale lord ever thought to turn the tribes to the Vale's advantage. That a desperate, warlike people could be useful, not to mention inexpensive. But perhaps the Vale lords consider such thoughts beneath them. After all, the Vale's isolation does breed an abundance of honor and pious bleating, which governs their decisions instead of foresight. Like a blind man who can only guess where his horse is taking him. I doubt Jon Arryn had even prepared for civil war when he raised his banners instead of handing over his young wards, Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon, to the Mad King. Honor demanded, and Lord Arryn obeyed. He'd have done the same if the boys hadn't been the lords of two great houses, who could field mighty armies of their own. But perhaps I give him too little credit. After all, if the war went against them, only Lord Arryn had a nice, impregnable castle to retreat into, and he was wise enough to take poor Lysa Tully into his bed to win the Riverlands as allies. Jon Arryn won, then Jon Arryn died. Wisely, the Vale stayed out of all the ensuing chaos. Its crops did not burn or wither in the fields from lack of men to tend them. Its strength was not drained by forced marches to futile skirmishes. In the Vale, life proceeds as it always has. Calm, proud. A world of high honor undisturbed by armies and men of low birth, but high ambition. Impregnable.